Julie, would you like to go ahead and get us started here?
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's awesome for us to see so many familiar names, learn lots of new bird names, which is terrific, and see and welcome you here. As many of you know, I started the Gabriel Foundation 31 years ago, after the loss of my first hyacinth macaw, Gabriel. And losing that amazing bird at such a young age, he never even made it to 2 years old, um, was really a triggering moment for me in my life. I have had birds as an adult for the last 52 years. So spending a day in the life with me generally includes hearing something about my bird or birds. But as the Gabriel Foundation has grown and matured, one of the common denominators that we see across the board is are questions from people who are truly concerned about what will happen to their birds. And this really is translatable to all pets, but since we're dealing with birds, that's our focus. But what will happen to their birds, or how do they protect their birds if something happens to them? And um, fortunately, we have seen the amount of uh, interest and pursuance in estate planning to include setting up ways for people to make sure that their pets are taken care of at that time when they're most needed. And when someone elects to go down that path, they are really putting into place a roadmap for what should happen to their animals that best honors or completely honors their wishes for their particular pet. Can't leave money to a bird. So Harley's going to fill us in about how that works. But you can certainly designate an organization. And the good thing about this is that starting is really important. And if you put words to paper and you've got the assistance of your estate planning professionals, once you have that outline, you're also able to go back every 5 years, maybe every 10 years, and reevaluate and make subtle changes as our lives change. And that's really important. But should something happen to you and there are no explicit plans about what happens to your beloved pets, it doesn't mean you can count on people that you love to do the right thing for your birds. And we have seen tragic consequences, including euthanasia, when people have failed to put um, systems into place to protect their birds. They feel that their relative, whether it's their children, a brother or sister, will take it on because it's been important to that particular person. And that person has no desire to do that. And even though someone is instructed, um, the family member to follow their wishes with the bird, getting them to us, or any other particular parrot shelter or rescue or welfare organization, whatever the title may be, it doesn't always happen. And I think that I what's so important to me to make clear here, and that's why we have the wonderful expertise of Harley. Harley is with the firm Cats Look and Honorado, and they have created a number of estate planning documents for some of us here, but people that we've known for a long time. And Alie Olsen, who is certainly schooled and familiar with planning for one's pets and making sure that there is funding to do so. And I think that in our particular country, um, not everybody wants to talk about death. What's going to happen to them? They feel like it's like an untouchable subject. It's painful. They don't they don't know what to do. They feel overwhelmed, and so they ignore it. Or someone will also say, "Well, I don't have any money to set aside." And it doesn't have to be about how much you have. It's about what you set up to have happen, which I think is so, so important. And I think that among many other excellent pieces of information, that Harley and Alie are going to share with us today. So Harley and Alie and the teams that have helped you be a part of this event for us today, we are incredibly grateful to you and to share your wisdom because you are going to have a major impact on every single person here today. And they will feel positive and relieved and have great information. It's a big day for everyone. So thank you. And I'm not sure who we want to start with. I don't know, Alie, if you and Harley have had that discussion, but we are ready for you. Absolutely.
Well, excellent. Alie and I did talk, and I thought it might be easier if I take the lead and kind of talk about the structure, because in all, both aspects are absolutely important. If you have the assets, great, we can take care of the pet, the bird. But if you don't have the estate plan, it's all going to fall apart. If you have the estate plan, great, we can designate something, but if we don't have the assets to take care of the bird, again, it all crumbles. So everything goes hand in hand. Having the right people in place is absolutely critical. So the way I think the easiest way to think about estate planning is let's just progress with what's the easiest to do, which might also be the worst answer, and work up to what's the hardest to do, which takes the most planning, the most work, but can become the best answer in the end. And I have a little case study. Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with parrots, but there is a fun case out of New York that we can talk about. And if I talk too much, you guys just let me know so I can make sure we have plenty of time for Alie as well. So anyways, let's start with what happens if we have no plan. This is the easiest thing to do. You don't have to do anything. Your state has a will set up for you, and this is called intestacy, to die without a will, and everything flows per your state's rules. So I'm in Colorado, and I can tell you in general, most of our states are going to follow this rule. We always have Louisiana. They got some crazy rules out there because of Napoleonic law. But if you die and you have no will, your assets will go to your next of kin. So that'll be your spouse, then your kids, your grandkids. We can't find anyone there. Then we go up to your grandparents, and we go back down to your uncles, your aunts, nieces, nephews, and we work our way out until we can find someone. But if we can't find anyone, then the state of Colorado takes these assets. And here, Colorado may not have an interest in your pet, your parrot, but I can guarantee you they have an interest in your assets. So what would they do with your pet? I don't know. Hopefully they would donate it to the proper shelter, like the Gabriel Foundation, maybe like, I'm going to call it Dumb Friends League. I know they changed their name in Colorado, but a pet shelter to take proper care of them, but we never know. If we give it to the family, because that's where it goes. Again, your spouse may never have liked your pet. Your kids may have never had an interest in your pet. But again, I can guarantee you they have an interest in your assets. So what usually happens is this beneficiary will keep the money and they'll dispose of the pet. There's no interconnection. There's no checks and balance. There's no guarantee what happens. So you are really leaving everything to the wayside, fingers crossed, hoping for the best. So how do we improve upon that? we have to be a little proactive and maybe create something called a last will and testament. And within that last will and testament, we need to designate a pet caretaker. Now, the thing with wills is it requires probate, so courts, attorneys, time, and money. But during the entire process, the caretaker could already have possession of your parrot. They could be given some assets to kind of help fund the care of your parrot. And then in the end of the process, whatever you may have designated under your will could end up going to the caretaker. Now, on the bright side, we have now designated a dollar amount, a percentage of your assets to go to a caretaker. The caretaker is fully aware that they're supposed to take care of your parrot, but again, we have no checks and balance. There is no guarantee that the caretaker actually will take care of your parrot. They could have been your best friend, your neighbor who swears up and down, absolutely, I love Skittles, I love Lulu, all these other great names I saw. I'm happy to take care of your parrot. But once they get the money, the parrot's kicked to the curb, they're keeping the cash. But maybe they do have the best interest in your parrot. Maybe they will take care of your parrot. We can still have an intervening event. What happens if your caretaker takes the parrot and the cash and then gets in a terrible accident and is sued? Now your cash is subject, or the inherited money is now subject to that caretaker's lawsuit. What happens if the caretaker needs to file bankruptcy? They get divorced. Or maybe worse yet, they become incapacitated. Again, we're hoping now the caretaker has a succession plan to make sure that the proper things occur. We're hoping that the caretaker doesn't get in any trouble so that your assets can stay safe if the caretaker for the care of your parrot. So there are some gaps in this estate plan with last wills and testaments. But again, it avoids the bare bone problem of who takes care of the parrot, how much goes for the care of the parrot. Now, if we were to improve upon this, we would want to create a parrot trust. And there's two fashions that we can do under here. The first one is through a last will and testament. So we still have probate, courts, attorneys, time, and money. But at the end of that process, a trust can be formed. And again, the assets you designate to go to your parrot can go into this trust for the benefit of the parrot. A better option is we could create a revocable trust. A revocable trust stands on its own two legs. You could already pre-direct your assets to this trust, and anything in that trust, no probate. So we can cut out all the courts. Maybe we can cut out the attorneys, but we can definitely speed up the process. Now, once we get to the trust aspect, now here's where the trust really shines. And that's you get to designate a trustee. This person is in charge of the money. They have a fiduciary duty to manage and oversee the money and make sure the money is used properly. Now, in this case, it's going to be in a parrot trust or a pet trust. And maybe you designate a caretaker, but the caretaker doesn't have the money. They have your pet, your parrot. And these two parties, the caretaker and the trustee, would work together to coordinate. The caretaker provides the love, the affection, the shelter, everything for the benefit of your pet. But if they need something, they have to call the trustee. And they say, hey, trustee, I need some money. The parrots, we need more food, we need more toys, there's a vet bill coming up, and the trustee reviews it and says, oh yeah, that makes sense, nothing out of the ordinary, here you go, caretaker, here's some money. But now we have some checks and balance because the caretaker doesn't have all the money, so it's not like the caretaker is thinking, oh, the best way to take your parrot to the vet is in a Porsche. So I, the caretaker, will just go buy myself a Porsche so that I can drive your parrot to and from in style to the vet. No. The trustee would review that and say, no, we're not buying a Porsche. I don't care how much you say the parrot loves the speed or the wind under his wings. It's just not practical. It's not appropriate usage of these funds. So now you get a little bit of checks and balance. On the caretaker side, the caretaker would have a right to an accountant. So if the trustee is skimming off the top, doing funny business, going to MGM bets to improve the money and not using the services of Alie to make sure it's properly funded, the caretaker could bring in action on behalf of your parrot. Whereas under the will, there is no checks and balance. There is no, it's not like your parent can speak up and say, hey, wait a second, the math here doesn't add up. There's no oversight. So here with the trust, we get that checks and balance. And I think that's a very critical aspect to make sure everything is done properly, everything is in the up and the up. Now, with the trust, you get to designate, this is what I want the caretaker to do. This is how much I want to be spent on all these various things for the benefit of your parent. And upon the passing of your parent, you get to say what happens to these assets. Does it go in part to the caretaker? Does it go to the Gabriel Foundation? Does it go to other relatives? You get to dictate and control all of that, and the trustee's in charge of that. And again, if there's any questions, again, the caretaker has some insight, and because it's still under this fiduciary aspect, if needed, the court can always be petitioned to make sure that the trust is followed properly. Now, some risks. Again, whenever we have a consolidation of fiduciaries, caretaker and trustee, or caretaker and just the holder of the money are all one and the same person, we lose those checks and balances. So when we're thinking about creating this trust, it's really imperative to pick someone that we trust. That's the trustee. Who do I trust to manage this money? Who do I trust to work properly with Alie and has no other financial interest in this? Such as them being the remainder beneficiary of this trust. Could I give the trustee the power to appoint a successor caretaker? So if our first caretaker turns out to be the worst person to take care of your pet, we don't want your parent to be stuck with that person. We want that trustee to maybe have the power to fire the caretaker and appoint a new caretaker. But again, we always have to maybe think one step ahead. How do we play a game to avoid problems? What happens if the trustee fires your caretaker, who's a completely third party, and the trustee says, the best person to take care of your parent is my wife, my husband, my kids, my other family members, and now they're in cahoots to rob the trust blind because again your pet doesn't have a spokesperson. So you can put provisions in the trust to prevent that. And you can have a third party maybe that you designate, like the Gabriel Foundation, who has the power to check in on them periodically and just make sure that everything is being proper, that it's still the right caretaker. There is no familiar relationship. The Gabriel Foundation might take a little fee for this little welfare checkup to make sure everything's good. But again, now we're creating additional layers to make sure what you've planned for, what you've wanted, actually occurs. And again, there's no kicking your parent to the curb. There's no euthanasia. There's no misuses of the funds. And everything is being followed properly. Now, in terms of who's the caretaker, it's really up to you. It's really important that you try to flesh that out with friends, families, maybe the Gabriel Foundation. If we name the Gabriel Foundation as the caretaker, and you have a third-party trustee over in charge of the money, your parent could easily go to the Gabriel Foundation, and the trustee would just pay funds to the Gabriel Foundation to help take care of your parent. Or if you're more broad with it, other costs and expenses of the Gabriel Foundation. Again, it depends on what your trust does. And if your parent is adopted out, then the trust could follow your parent to who this new caretaker or foster parent is of your new parent. Again, it just depends on what you want to happen under your estate plan. And it's pretty rare where we have to say, oh, sorry, what you're trying to do is illegal. It's not feasible. We can put all sorts of checks and balances in here. We just want to make sure that you name the right people. And I know that was one of the questions, and that is the hardest thing to always come up with, be it our kids or our pets who are our kids. Trying to find the right person to take care of them is always difficult. But by segregating out the positions, it really does help ensure that if someone has ulterior motives, they're not getting unfettered access to this money. We'll have the right people in charge. So in terms of a case, we have a case out of New York, and this is back in 2007. So some of you might remember this here. This is the estate of Helmsley. She was in New York. She had a dog. I forget what breed it was. And she had a big penthouse on top of a building. And she left $12 million in trust for her dog, along with the penthouse. The dog got to live in the penthouse. The trust paid for I believe it was the butler to take care of the dog. Whatever the dog needed, food, best level food, toys, bed, anything, everything the dog got. But there was a trustee. The trustee managed that money. So in this case, the caretaker always had to contact the trustee. Trustee always reviewed it, made the distributions. Trustee would come in and do a little welfare check to make sure the dog was still there. It wasn't just the caretaker making up stuff. Oh yeah, the dog's really hungry. He just needed $50,000 of kibbles and bits. Please send me that. No, it was legitimately checked on. And then ultimately, when the dog passed, the assets went to charity. So then the trustee, again, no financial interest. There wasn't any when my dog dies, the trustee gets some money, and the trustee's thinking, all right, how do I get rid of this dog? No, it just went to charity. The trustee got compensation for their time, so they had the little financial incentive to say, hey, the longer this dog lives, the happier this dog is, the better off it is for me as a trustee. I get paid. The caretaker, the butler, he got to live in that condo. He got some compensation to take care of the dog. So he got, a little bit of best of the both worlds there. So again, incentive to do what's right, and yet checks and balances. Now, when we think about this, there are some various other cases in here, and we just want to make sure that when you do the plan, there's enough instructions to warrant the amount. So we might not be leaving $12 million in trust for our parrots. I mean, we definitely could, but we might not be. But it still might be a lot of money. And so we want to work with qualified financial advisors to create a financial plan to justify potentially the amount of money. Because if we, and in the Helmsley case, I should point out, she had kids and they got next enough. Then her dog got that 12 million, which is one of the largest portions of the estate. Well, the kids challenged her estate plan, and her trust didn't have enough information of why her dog needed $12 million. And so the court went in and said, hey, the dog's X age, this dog's breed only lives Y period of time, this condo only costs X amount, the dog only eats so much. All these are various factors. And through that case, the court ultimately said 12 million is way overfunded, not proper. So they toned that down. I think it came down to maybe like $5 million in the end. And the excess ended up going to the charities early on. And then there's another case out in New York where this guy had a bunch of cats, and he said all sorts of reasons why his cats needed all these various things. Had a financial plan in there to justify the amount. And so when it was challenged, the court said, no, we get to keep these millions and millions of dollars in this trust for the cats. There is no early carve off for his kids. And so it really protected it. So we want to be very specific in the estate plan. And we want to make sure that it's properly funded. Now, in terms of things, the trust is the most work. It typically will cost the most to create. You'll probably work closely with your attorney to make sure that all the provisions you want are in there, all the contingencies are in there. But once it's done, then you have to work with your financial advisors and your institutions to make sure that your assets actually flow into that trust. It's typically by titling your assets or updating your beneficiary designations on your assets to name that trust. If you don't do that, then we still fall into probate. But thankfully, there would be a will, a pour-over will in this case, and that would grab these probate assets and still transfer it to your trust. But that's the long and expensive way, because it still requires the courts, the attorneys, the time, and the money. Versus will, you create it, it's cheaper, it's easier, but you're really kicking the can down the road so that when you die, then your executor steps in. They have to file with the court. They have to round up all your assets and then go through the whole probate process before a distribution can occur. And probate often can take at least 1 to 2 years. So it can be quite a delay. Now, when we're thinking about trusts, there are two issues, one of which I already talked about, which is the financial aspect. We want to make sure it's properly funded so that we have enough money to kind of last the duration of the trust, to make sure that your parent is properly taken care of. And then there's another rule. It's an old English common law rule that followed us across the pond here, and it's called the rule against perpetuity. So in the old days, a trust had to vest with someone in a life in being or 21 years thereafter. Well, unfortunately, as smart as parrots are and as great as they are, the court does not consider them as an individual. So that is not a life in being that we can use. So then we're only stuck with 21 years. But we know that 21 years is not sufficient for some of our parrots here because they're young. Thankfully, some states like Colorado have come back and modified this rule, and it's mostly due to the complexity of the rule. There was an old law professor who wrote an 800-page treatise on this rule just to explain it. And at the end, he says, well, yeah, I think you guys kind of get the idea. So complex that states said, hey, this gets messed up so much. So Colorado came back and said, let's put 1,000-year savings clause. So if we did a pet trust in Colorado, we have 1,000 years, which I think should be sufficient for our parrots and our pets. So we'd be fine. But there's other states, and I believe it's Maryland, has still a strict 21 years or a life in being. They do not have a savings clause. So we'd have a problem there. Now, could we create, if we're in Maryland, could we create a trust somewhere else for the care of your parrot? Absolutely. We could direct the assets to a Colorado trust, a Florida trust, wherever else that we have these exceptions. Now, thankfully, most of the states have either 1,000-year or 100-year savings clause. And then there's some states like South Dakota, if I remember correctly, they just completely abolished the rule. So it could be in there in perpetuity. But it's important to work with your legal team to make sure that your state is a good state to have that pet trust. Now, the last aspect that I want to talk about are powers of attorney and coordination. So everything we talked about is what happens if I die? Who takes care of my parrot? How does my parrot get access to my assets to make sure my parrot is taken care of? But if you're incapacitated, you're not deceased. Therefore, your will and your trust do not take effect quite yet. So it's important that we have a medical power of attorney and a financial power of attorney for yourself. This allows you to appoint someone to tell the doctors what to do or what not to do. It gives someone the ability to access your assets, to pay your bills and your expenses. Well, if something happens to you and you say drop dead, pass out in the grocery store, paramedics arrive, they don't know who your agent is. But hopefully you have your phone, hopefully you have your wallet. And basically, it's just breadcrumbs. We want to have enough breadcrumbs to make sure the right people are contacted. So on your phone, under the emergency function, if you have your top people, your healthcare agents, your financial agents, maybe even your caretaker for your parrot listed there, then the doctors, the hospital know who to call. If your healthcare agent knows who to call to take care of your parrot, or maybe your healthcare agent is the person you trust to take care of your parrot, then they immediately now know they need to get into your house to secure your parrot, to make sure that they're not stuck there without food, without water, without any other needs that they might have. Under the financial power of attorney, we want to make sure that power of attorney says, don't only just take care of me, make sure there's some money that gets carved off to my caretaker so that my caretaker is not bearing the financial burden of whatever cost my parrot might incur. Give this caretaker some money to take care of them. That helps avoid other problems, because without a power of attorney for medical or finance, we have to go to court. And again, this is the no plan. The court comes in. Financial, it's going to be a bank. The bank has no interest or care about your parrot. They're going to say, we need to take care of you. What happens to your parrot? I don't know. The bank could give away your parrot. It could disappear. I don't know what the answer is. medical power of attorney. They don't control the money, but they control the well-being of your place, and they would coordinate with the financial agent. And if the healthcare agent says there's no way for you to move back into the house, again, now where's the shelter for your parent if, say, the caretaker might be living in your house? So again, we want to have the proper coordination. So written instructions, a daisy chain of phone contacts, people knowing what to do. Maybe it's just a matter of, hey, I need to drop my parrot off at the Gabriel Foundation as a temporary solution until things get resolved. But having that plan listed out can really prevent a lot of problems. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alie to talk about some finances. I'm sure you guys will have more questions. I was happy to answer those questions.
All right. Thanks, Harley. I have some questions on my own, so I'm sure there will be many from other people, but thank you for that. I will share my screen. We'll kind of get into my part of it and see if this. Perfect. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so let's get into kind of more of the detail of everything Harley looked at and even more, how are we going to fund the trusts, all of that good stuff. So, protecting, again, this is what Harley focused on, and let's kind of get into a little bit, again, more detail. Again, all of you have parrots and you love your parrots and they're very unique parrots. Again, we're looking at very long lifespan challenges. Some can live up to 80 years. They could have complex care needs. Again, you need to document, do they have special diets? What is their social interaction? Do they like people? Do they not? Do they have companions? The medications and safe housing. So you want to make sure we address these issues. And then we'll talk about estate planning. Obviously, Harley talked about the creating your estate documents, whether it's a will or a trust. We also need to include the financial means, and we'll talk about that and how much. And then again, the arrangements and about ensuring continuity of care. So Harley addressed, making sure we have, a caretaker in place, someone that you trust, that can do a good job. And then emergency preparedness. Again, Harley talked about if you have a stroke in the grocery store, what are the plans that you've identified for taking care of your bird? So again, how long, many of you already know this, but birds can live a long time, especially the larger birds. So we need to make sure that whatever we put in place can not outlive them. That obviously is the trust documents, but also the financial means. So the first 72 hours after incapacity or death, again, make sure, whoever you designate as the emergency caregiver has a key to your house, with home access, knows your parrot, knows how to take care of them, make sure they get water, medication, monitoring, whatever that may entail. And then what's important is to make sure you communicate with that whoever you have as that emergency caregiver. Are they willing to do this? Are they still in a capacity to take care of this? So you want to make sure you regularly check in with them and that they understand the responsibilities and also have, the up-to-date information, whether it's your, the medical or the medicine that your parrot is taking, or anything that's changed with your parrot's healthcare needs or living needs. You want to make sure that that's written down. So I would recommend, of course, building an emergency team. If obviously you designate a caretaker, but always have backup plans. And I think Harley always, whenever he does an estate plan, you have like 8 backup people that, he always wants to make sure are in place, because you just never know who's going to be willing, who's going to be able, who's, going to be in town. Maybe when an incapacity event happens, maybe they're on vacation. So you just never know what the circumstances may be. So you want to make sure that everything is very detailed, and that you have kind of plan B, plan C, for his, even plan Z. So again, choosing who your caregivers are, even if, choosing the sanctuaries, Gabriel Foundation, and if, always make sure that there's people and facilities in place for this plan. And then we'll talk about the financial planning. Harley talked about being very specific in the trust and that's how you want your parent to be taken care of. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, many of you, I was very impressed with how many people are from out of town. I mean, we have people from, I was noting, New Jersey, Florida, Kentucky, Minnesota, Pittsburgh. I love that, this webinar is being seen by a lot of people from all over. So depending on who you choose as the organization or the person you want to take care of your bird, maybe you want your daughter to take care of it and she lives in Florida, you live in New York, how do you plan to transport them? What about the documentation? Each state is different, and Harley addressed each state is different as far as the trust goes. So you want to make sure that you take that into consideration. Veterinary records, you want to make sure everything is kind of buttoned up so that when something does happen, the caregiver can come in and transport it to somewhere that they have the background information to take care of the bird. And then, so I always recommend creating a binder, easy, make it so that the caregiver can just walk in and kind of plug and play. Includes obviously the parrot, the species, age, medical history, all the medications. Make sure everything is very detailed so that there is no question on, how long we're going to have the bird, what the medications are, the feeding schedules, sleep routines. You want to make sure that this bird is taken care of. So without communication, that may not happen. So make sure everything is documented very carefully. And I just recommend putting it in a binder so that the caretaker doesn't have to dig through your documents in order to find what they need. So funding of a trust for long-term care, we'll talk about that. How long should you do, how long do you need to fund or figure on funding the trust for? How many years? The sources, we'll talk about that. Again, how to balance the funding and the management. I love the fact that, the trustee and the caretaker being different people, the checks and balances, and then always kind of review that again to make sure that everything is as you want it and it aligns with your parrot's care needs and the financial circumstances. So how much does it cost to take care of a bird? And I'm sure Julie knows this more than I do, but depending on the birds, you could have very different costs involved. A cockatoo could, depending because of their longevity in age, they could cost up to 175,000 for their lifetime of care. Here's an example how much, again, we got the question, how much should I leave? That's a great question. For example, an African gray, current age 20, they could live another 30 to 40 years. If you look at a total cost of 3,500, and again, that's without inflation, a 30-year cost is 105,000, but with inflation, you could be looking at 170 to 200,000 that bird could cost over its lifetime. So how do you want to fund that cost? And we'll talk about that. And then if you even have more than one parrot, you have two parrots or even three parrots, then of course that the cost of funding could increase from there. So this is something certainly to do research on, as far as where you take your bird. But Julie, would you agree this is about the cost of what a bird would cost, or what do you
Yes,
feel?
and I thank you for asking this question and providing this very, very important information. One of the things that people don't always consider, and this is a precursor to answering your question, is that as birds get older, their veterinary care and their medical requirements often become more expensive because we see many of the same diseases in senior to geriatric parrots. And for example, we track the ages of every one of the birds for us. Sometimes we have an absolute birth or hatch date. Other times it's sort of guesstimated by the provenance that's come with that bird. Right now, our oldest resident at the Gabriel Foundation was hatched in 1942. And that's been documented. So that particular bird, he's got medical needs. He is definitely a geriatric bird. His physical needs are somewhat less than a young, robust bird. And when I say young and robust, I'm really talking up to 25 or even 30 years of age, which is a long time. And so perhaps some of his environmental needs will change, but his medical care may increase dramatically. And I think that taking a look at this is really so important. And in all fairness, a larger bird is more expensive to maintain and everything that it requires than a smaller bird. But there are fixed costs that any organization like the Gabriel Foundation faces all the time. And one of those is that people they oftentimes fail to set aside plans for themselves as they age or become disabled. And so they don't even think or avoid at least doing it for their bird. So I think, you're talking about if a bird is going to be with us, and we have some birds that have been with us since I started this organization, and the first group of birds started coming to us in 1996. That's a long time. And they have been with us every day, every week, every month, every year since that beginning phase. And you look it up and you figure, even if we take a baseline, and we will oftentimes do this at the foundation, we'll just go for our avian related fixed costs. And that's with our employees, food, and enrichment. It really does not include enough on veterinary care, but we guesstimate that if we just take an average, and that's not factoring in size, but we look at it across the board, a bird every day for each bird costs us between $12 and $15. And when we have 200 plus birds in our care, and we're talking about the number of years that those birds have the potential to live, that figure becomes surprising to people because they don't think about what that looks like, keeping that bird in one place, safe, secure, and as that person wished for the rest of that bird's life. So I think your figures are absolutely accurate. I think that for most people also, that this is really an option for them to read and to understand and go, I never looked at it this way. I never thought about it. It kind of takes my breath away. How am I going to be able to do this? Does this mean they won't take my bird if I don't have the money? So those are all kinds of factors that go into every single discussion we have with someone about providing for their birds. And I will tell you, because we have a demographic right now, and I'm very dedicated and appreciative of my team at the Gabriel Foundation that tracks this information. We have never seen in our 31 years the demand and the need for requests for parrots in that event of that person's death or disability that we are seeing now. Yesterday, I met with 3 people on the same thing. The day before, I met, and each one of those conversations, these discussions are like this webinar. It takes me 2 to 3 hours to have this because we're not just talking about, and I think this goes so importantly into what Harley has discussed and what you're bringing up, Alie, that for that organization, and I want to put it out there to everyone, we're using the Gabriel Foundation as example. There are other organizations that do a really, really good job. But please, please, please make the effort to check out, to connect with, to visit if you can, that organization to make sure it's right for you, that you have a sense of confidence and trust because your birds are going to be the recipients of your decision. And for us, it is so clear that in talking about these very private, personal plans, that none of us like to really think about that eventuality, is that it's not just about the money. It's not just about the bird. It's trusting that organization, trusting the succession plans of that organization, trusting the facility of that organization, and also creating a relationship, because that relationship is so viable for each one of us who wants our birds provided for. And that organization, in my personal opinion, must recognize the depth of that relationship that we set up with any potential funder or donor expressly for their birds.
Now, Julie, if someone comes to you, someone's passed away and they have a bird and they don't have assets, that bird could be at risk of being adopted out, right? There's not a guarantee that you'll take care of that bird. Is that correct?
That can be an option. And for us, people have the option of, number one, designating that their bird remain in sanctuary. But along with sanctuary comes funding. We have more than enough birds that are in our sanctuary program that are not financially provided for, and many of them are there for behavioral or medical related issues. They won't fit into even the most well-prepared, suited family position. So we see that some birds that come into our care are significantly old, may not have a lot of time left in their lives, and we want that time to be the very best that it can be. But people are given a choice when they're making a plan for their bird, and that plan for their that plan is, number one, I want my birds to always remain forever at the Gabriel Foundation. Then that's an easier one for us to answer because we can provide solid figures. The other option is that I don't know what I want to be done with my bird. And I defer to the Gabriel Foundation to make the decision of whether or not it will be better for my bird to be adopted out. And fortunately, our adoption program, I think, speaks highly of us because it is a very structured, detailed process when adopting a bird from the Gabriel Foundation. The third, the third option is yes, absolutely. I want my bird to be adopted out because I can only afford to take care of my bird for a year or 2 years or 6 months. And then what does the organization do? Say, well, we can't do that, you know? And so far we haven't because we have been recipients, and you well know this, Alie, of some generous donors, and that generosity helps to offset the care of birds that haven't been as lucky to have someone provide for them or care for their needs. And certainly all the birds that come to us from other shelters and transfers, I mean, we're constantly being requested by organizations all around this country to take birds in for very specific reasons. And it's we have to take that request or those requests very seriously because we do not want to jeopardize the care and the health of those birds that are already with us.
And thank you for answering that. I think that's important for everyone to understand if their bird is going to be rejected, if they don't have the means to cover the costs. But the reason why we're having this webinar is, of course, the Gabriel Foundation needs to be sustainable. That all takes care of that needs funding. So the more you can plan for that, and that's what we'll address, the better. And the more you can guarantee that care will be in place. So,
and also to bring this up, people don't have to wait till they die or are disabled to start making donations. If they're invested in sustainability, this is something that can benefit them. And Harley, you can certainly attest to this. If someone is in a potential income bracket where they can use the benefit of tax-deductible charitable donations, this is a great time to do it. And that may be really a terrific opportunity for them and their estate, so that perhaps the value of that estate might change for tax purposes with their charitable giving. And I don't know, Harley, if that's something you'd like to elaborate on, you or Alie.
I'm going to elaborate on that, if you don't mind. So, and if you have anything further, Harley, after I present, then certainly chime up. Okay, so let's move on again. How to fund the trust. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can do that. Obviously, you can put cash or bank accounts into that. The benefit of that, there's immediate liquidity, easy for the trustee to access, simple administration, and then there's no market risk. So there's peace of mind that you're not going to lose this money. The problem is, because the cash doesn't grow, that inflation could erode the purchasing power. So, and that could maybe not get you enough money to take care of the bird over time. So, but it certainly is good for short-term needs, emergency reserves. So in the case of incapacity, for example, this is great. You can, access pretty easily. Also, you can have investment accounts. Now, that could be invested in the market, obviously using stocks, mutual funds, different growth vehicles. And that could offset inflation. And this is more appropriate for long-lived birds that you're going to be in the market for 10, 20, even 30 years. You need that growth to offset inflation. And then the trustee can figure out how to distribute the funds so you don't have to do a lump sum all at once. You can wait and kind of time the market. It's a little better for that. So again, as an example, put 200,000 into an investment portfolio, 5% average annual return. That's going to give you a lot more than currently what cash is, which, even in a money market, you're getting about 3%. And that could go down, could go up, hard to know. But the average return in the market over time, you're looking at between 5 and 10%, depending on how aggressive you are. And then there's life insurance. Now, life insurance is easy because you can put, depending on your age and your health issues, a smaller premium, and that can leverage to give you more death benefit. That's as a beneficiary, they would be on the life insurance contract. So that could be immediate cash for caregivers, preserves other assets for beneficiary, easy, it's easy to designate a beneficiary. The problem is, again, that if you designate a beneficiary and they get the cash, are they going to use it for the bird's care? So you could obviously put the trust as the beneficiary in this case, and then designate, as Harley had mentioned, a caregiver, trustee, and then they can they can distribute the funds as needed. So that's a vehicle that some people have used. And before we get to there, so again, a lot of people have asked, can I just put, either the facility, whether it's Gabriel Foundation or someone as the beneficiary on? That's easy. It's easy. You can certainly do that. But as far as IRAs, that can be a little more complicated. You can do that for bank accounts as a POD. You can list the Gabriel Foundation as, or even the trust as the beneficiary. But, Harley, I think there's certain things to think about if you designate your IRA assets. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So I see some of these questions here already, and one of them was on like their TIA qualified account. One of the biggest things with the qualified accounts is it has to have an eligible designated beneficiary to get one of the better tax advantages. So if we name your spouse or a minor kid, and minor kids are kind of questionable because they're not going to stay minor all the time. Not questionable like you shouldn't give them the money, of course. But the spouse, they're an eligible designated beneficiary, and they can spread the distributions over their life expectancy. But anyone who's not an eligible designated beneficiary will fall within maybe a 5-year or 10-year rule where they have to start cashing everything out, paying all the income taxes. So if we put that qualified account in a trust for the benefit of your parent, again, like I said, even though they might be family, they might be intelligent, and live a long time like a person, the IRS still doesn't treat them as a person. So we might have to cash out very fast. And where we had this large IRA, suddenly have to cash it out in 5 years and pay all the income taxes on it. And so what became a large amount might become a small amount and not achieve our goal. But if we give it to a 501c3 like the Gabriel Foundation, they don't have that same taxation effect. And so again, if you're going to donate your parent to the Gabriel Foundation, take care of them, I think the TIA Craft Qualified account is one of the best tools to fund it, because there's no income taxes on it. They get to use it. Uncle Sam doesn't get to put their fingers in there and take a chunk of the pie.
All right. Thanks. I think it's important because I think people, retirement accounts are probably one of the bigger assets that clients have. So it's always important that you understand how that works if you wanted to use this for funding your parents' care. All right. Now, Julie kind of mentioned this, even beyond the pet trust, I think there's a couple charitable planning strategies that you can do now that gives to the charity that you might have in mind for your parents. So this is something that you can do while you're still living. Now, two that I find most common is you have the donor advised fund. What I like about that, there's a couple of ways you can fund that. You can put cash or you can put appreciated stocks. I've used that a lot with clients where they put appreciated stocks in there. They don't have to pay the capital gains. They get the charitable deduction on their taxes, and then they can designate who they want the funds to go to. They have to go to a 501c3 in order for it to qualify as a charitable deduction. And that is given in the year you contribute to a donor advised fund. The income tax deduction that you get, you just need to keep in mind 30% of adjusted gross income if you gift appreciated stock. And if you gift cash, you can deduct up to 60%. But that's a wonderful way, even if, for example, you do not use the funds in the donor advised fund, because this can last for your lifetime, you can designate a successor owner for the donor advised fund, or you can just have the proceeds, if any are left, to go to the charity of choice. So that's a good one to think about. Also, the charitable remainder trust. This is interesting if you need income in your retirement. This is beautiful because you get the income while you're living, and then at death, the proceeds go to the charity of choice. So that's something to think about as well. Benefits you and also the charity. And this is also something that you can gift appreciated stock to. So it avoids those capital gains if you have them. I know I have a lot of clients that have had stock for many years, and we just can't sell it because there's huge capital gains. Well, this is a perfect solution for that because everyone has their charity of choice. And so this is, again, something that you can make sure, that Gabriel Foundation is, you're giving to them. If you are giving to them, this is a way to do it now while you're still living. Now, as far as sample funding strategy, it's not like a one size fits all. For example, if you want to fund $300,000 for the lifetime of a bird, you can do several different investment options. You can do maybe $50,000 in cash. That could be the emergency bucket. You could put $100,000 into an investment portfolio. That's for the growth, for the care of your bird. And then we could do a life insurance policy. So again, you can do a combination of all of these if you wanted to. So that's just something to kind of think about. And then in addition to that, if you wanted to also do a donor advised fund so that it feels good to give, you can give during your lifetime. So I put down here, of course, as we've talked about this, the pet trust answers who will care for my birds. And I think that's so important. The funding answers how will the care be paid for. So, all of these are important for the success of your plan. So again, key takeaways, make sure you designate a caregiver with a backup plan, create a care binder, make sure you have the legal documents in place and the financial planning. And then, of course, always share that plan and review the plan, on a however 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I'd make sure if you think any of your situation or the caregiver that you've designated as situation changes, make sure that this is updated and reviewed. So I thank you. I appreciate your time. And now we will leave it for any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Alie. Thank you, Harley. I'm sure our viewers today have lots of questions. And Kira, I'm going to turn this over to you so you can facilitate that, please.
Yes, there are a lot of questions. I am going to filter through a little bit and see where would be a good place for us to start. And then we're going to work through them as we go. Alrighty. Let's see. Since we were talking a little bit about funding just now, I think that might be a good place for us to start. And let's see. So some of the questions that we're receiving is like, when should I start setting these things up? One of the questions is, should we be working on this right now as opposed to much farther down the road? And I think kind of a more simple, or my simple answer to that is, it's always good to start paying into these funds as soon as possible. Because, I mean, when we were looking at some of those figures that you were showing us, Alie, that can be thousands of dollars worth of care that we're looking at, especially if we're having younger birds and we're planning for their futures and we're talking about 20, 30 years. Starting now or whenever you're able is obviously going to provide a lot more funding than if you're waiting and only paying into those funds at the very last minute. We're just not going to have as much funding. But I'll let you answer a little bit more about that.
Well, I think Harley kind of started with this. No plan is a plan. And if you don't have a plan, then again, you're at risk that your bird is not going to be taken care of as you'd like it to be. So I would say, and I think Harley, you would agree, starting as soon as possible to make sure, because you just never know what life may bring. You don't know the events that might happen. I've had many clients healthy people that have had serious health issues and even death very early in their years. So it's just, again, something to plan for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're going to create like a financial investment plan with Alie or with your financial advisor, and just kind of set that off to the side. Say, hey, this is to take care of my parrot. Like Alie said, it's cash and it's losing value over time. But if I can invest that now and put it off to the side, or buy a proper life insurance policy, maybe one that builds with cash value, then by the time I do pass and say I leave it to the caretaker, the trust, or the Gabriel Foundation, what was a small amount becomes a larger amount because I've had time value of money to grow and compound that. And I saw also in the questions here about funding a trust. You can fund that trust at any time. The trust just has to be created. But in terms of funding a trust, if it's a testamentary trust, which is something through a will, it can't be funded until you die, because the trust just does not exist. It has to go through probate. Court has to stamp it off, and then the trust exists. So there's no way to fund that. Other than, again, working with Alie, your financial advisor, and just building that the underlying asset to be able to flow into that trust. Now, a revocable trust, like I mentioned earlier, stands on its own 2 feet. It actually exists. It has a name. You can put assets in that trust right away. You can do beneficiary designations to say on your death, it goes to the trust. Either of those 2 avenues will avoid probate. It will work perfectly fine. So I really wouldn't sweat which way is better. They both work great. Now, if you're trying to really say what's going to work the best, because there's another question here, and I think it kind of ties in properly, is how do I set aside funds to take care of my parent right away during estate administration? Well, under a trust, if the trust owns the asset, there is no estate administration. Your trustee already has a prime directive: take care of my parent. So they could send money to whoever this caretaker is. They could coordinate with the person who's going to pick up your parent and drive them across the state to the Gabriel Foundation or wherever they need to go. So those funds can be more readily available. In probate, depending on the state, we might need to have to petition the court for permission to get that money right away. So there could definitely be a big delay, and we're really relying more on the benevolence of the caretaker to maybe go out of pocket to pay those costs and then file an expense report against the estate later on to get repaid. So again, like I said, from worst to best, a revocable trust is the best option because it can absolutely tackle all of those problems, and there's less potential for things to slip through the cracks.
And one of the questions that we had received that is pretty closely related to this conversation, let me see if I can find it here really quickly. Oh, they had asked, do we need some type of funding source during the probate period? But if I'm understanding this correctly, it would be best to try to avoid having that probate period at all by having your revocable trust set up so that you're not then trying to petition for the funding while you're in probate, and then it's kind of up to the court and it's up in the air. But are there any types of funding? Like, let's say we were in a situation where we didn't have the revocable trust and maybe we had like our last will and testament. Are there ways other than petitioning for the funding that you're able to provide funding during those kind of probate periods?
So most states will have a family allowance. And again, no matter how much we think our parent is our family, the court just doesn't see it that way. So it becomes really rough. And as Alie had kind of talked a little bit about, is even if I have that trusted caretaker and I say, hey, let me leave this bank account pay on death directly to this caretaker, the caretaker might say, oh, you really liked my friendship. Thanks so much for the money, but not use it for the care of your parent. If it's in the estate, again, the easiest way is the caretaker, or maybe it's a family member who will just come out of pocket or use some of that family maintenance to cover that cost to pay it. But it is a big, giant gap where, gee, how do we facilitate some of this general administration? So where the will is an answer, it's not the best answer. In terms of assets in the estate, all the assets are available to cover this cost. The executor will most likely dip into the liquid assets, so cash and cash equivalents. But where you really get a problem is if you just have a house and $5 in the bank account, the $5 isn't going to cover it. We got to sell that house. What's that process? Again, that could be a month. It could be a couple of months before you even get any funds available. So again, working with a proper financial advisor to have the right nature of assets really makes it a better plan.
And we had a question that was kind of similar to what you just mentioned of they have pretty limited income, they're on Social Security and disabled, and they would be unable to provide any funding besides some small donations. And then they were asking if it would still be possible for an organization like the Gabriel Foundation to take on their bird. And maybe, Julie, this is a good question for you to answer. We kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of like what exactly would happen with your bird. We have some people that want to place their bird in sanctuary with TGF, and they would be a lifelong resident. But with that, they are also providing the funding for their bird to be a lifelong resident with our organization. I would say probably in this scenario, there is a possibility that we would be able to take on those birds, but without any funding, they would likely be entering into our adoptions program where we would then find a next home for them. But Julie, is there anything else that someone with limited funding would be able to do to help with their bird's future? Is there like a way that they can list any other assets? Like if those were then to be sold for then those assets to go to their bird, or would you have any recommendations there?
Well, certainly if someone owns personal property, in real estate, for example, those tangible assets um, can, and Harley or Alie, you need to just clarify this, can be left to the charitable organization. We are beneficiaries for several people on the entirety of their estates, but it's not like we wake up every morning and go, oh, well, who died today? No, that's not what we want. We want them to be able to be with their bird as long as possible. And so real estate is certainly one way. Alie brought up about stocks and investment portfolios. I also think that on a limited income, that one way that people can feel more comfortable and they're going in the right direction is to set up an insurance policy. Because there are those, yes, there are going to be money for everything, but there are some that I think can be considered more affordable for people. And Alie, you could address that. But that's a way to start. And if someone is younger, let's say someone on this webinar today is in their 30s, their 40s, and they've just got their new young bird. The bird is 5 years old, 10 years old. They can start that process now. And while they're still young and hopefully have an earning potential, um, that's an opportunity to create funding. Disability uh, is that's different for every single person, what they're receiving. We certainly wouldn't want anyone to not be able to have their needs met in order to just provide for the parent. So we have to also be really, really careful about saying, yes, we can take your bird, but, or we can say, yes, we can take your bird when, or come up with parameters after discussion with that person. But I think each person really needs to have, even if it's a one-time thing, to set up an appointment with an estate planning person, whether it's their trusted CPA, if they have someone like that, certainly with an attorney. Hopefully, everybody that we're talking to will be inspired to create a will after this discussion and then take it from there. So I think there's a couple of other things. Historically, we have not turned people away because of that. But we are also uh, working to help as many people as we can. But again, as Harley and Alie have both presented, we have fixed cost that we need to meet every single day. And we've been around now 31 years. It's a long time. And we've seen a lot and experienced a lot. And we also know that despite the best of plans, that every day each one of us people have on this earth is really a gift. And we needed to look at it and make the most so that our animals that we truly love will be provided for.
We had another good question. That was they were asking specifically to get a cost of care estimate for their younger small bird.
79 wireless caller. Just one, 720.
Sorry, I
234,
apologize.
No worries. There we go. So we had someone that was asking questions about just cost estimates, and Alie had provided a really good example for a cost estimate. And I think that this is something that is going to be pretty individual for each person to create for their bird. Because we know that all birds are going to have different needs. So if you have a middle-aged bird that has some sort of lifelong virulent disease that requires regular like 3-month checkups at the vet, and they're on daily medication that's expensive medication, that cost of care is going to be a lot different than the cost of care for a healthy bird that hasn't had any ongoing health issues. But of course, we do need to factor in most birds, just like most people, are going to develop some sort of medical requirements in their older age. So how do we factor that in? I guess if I was building a cost estimate for one of my birds, probably just start tallying up what I'm paying each month for their food, how much I'm spending on that, and then I'm multiplying that to see what the annual cost of care. I'm keeping track of how much I am spending on their veterinary, how much I am spending on their enrichment, accounting for inflation, and building that for each of my individual birds because they all have their own individual needs. Do you have any recommendations, Julie, for if someone was trying to build a cost estimate for their financial advisor for their birds, of things that they just need to factor in?
Yeah, I do. And I think that that's something we can certainly help and do a good job by putting that together on paper for people to do that. I think it'd be wonderful, but we want to talk about a figure for veterinary care. And as we talked about, that's going to depend on that bird's age range. We're talking about exactly as you mentioned that you're wanting to do for your flock, what it costs you monthly for food, what about enrichment, cage, providing an appropriate cage. Um, uh, if you need to have your bird groomed, all those costs that are out of pocket costs for providing for a bird.
And we've had a lot of people asking for different handouts and things to help them kind of in the process. And I think maybe that's something we could create of like estimate for this and then times that times 12. So you have your annual cost. And I think that one of the things that I'm seeing here a lot in the questions and the comments is just people feeling overwhelmed. Of course, this is a lot of information, it's a lot of planning and just looking for places to start and for resources. So maybe that's something that you and I can work on. And
Yes. And just a couple of questions that are posted. I'll answer those quickly. Yes, we have gone in many, many times and traveled to pick up a bird in need. And one of the ways that this can be funded is to set that money aside via your will that is payable on death so that you have that. That certainly is a possibility. We have oftentimes traveled to other states to get birds here. We also have birds. We have birds coming tomorrow from Houston, and we work with several transporters that we have supreme confidence in, and it's much less stressful for those birds to travel that way, so we can provide the cost of transport. I want everyone that they should, if they see their vet on a regular basis, so at least once a year, if it's been every 5 years, it's not going to be a help. But if you see your veterinarian at least once a year, when you put an estate plan in place, let your veterinarian know the who, what, where, when, why, and how to call should they be the person that first gets information from the appropriate individual saying, my so-and-so just passed. I'm calling you from New York. They're in California. How can I get the birds to you for their care until we get them picked up? Getting that veterinarian, that information is important. If you have a designated organization, for example, the Gabriel Foundation, please, please, please share that information with us so that we know. And you can certainly advise those who may put your obituary out there or someone that you trust with these kinds of arrangements so that they know what you want. In addition to the legal documentation, that they know what you want. I think it's really important. So parrots do come to us from other states. That certainly is arrangeable, as I just mentioned. And I can't tell you specifically how much does it cost to have a will and a revocable trust created. Harley or Alie, is that something you might be able to give a guesstimate towards? You both know what these documents are like.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
of it depends on the state you're in. Um, it could be easily, a will, a couple $100. I'd probably put it closer to maybe 1,000, depending on what you're doing. Especially if there's a trust embedded in there. The Wall Street Journal back in 2010ish, so it's been a while here. They said on average expect 3,000 plus for a revocable trust. In tying into this, there was a question. You can go to other states to do your estate plan, but you just want to make sure that whoever's doing it is qualified to do an estate plan that would work in your state. But there are some general rules and exceptions. So, for example, Florida has a very specific statute that says if you do your will in Colorado and it meets Colorado's rules, that will, when you go back to Florida, is still valid, even if it might not have all the bells and whistles that Florida requires. And in general rule, there's reciprocity amongst all the states. So we'll find a very similar rule in pretty much every single plan. And I do want to touch on the funding of your bird and tie it into a question about the house. A lot depends on what your plan is, because if your house is going to be like Miss Helmsley, you want your pair to stay in your house in the same setting what it's accustomed to. We can't just fund enough to care for our parrot. We also have to fund enough to cover the housing costs, the insurance, the property taxes, the upkeep. So do take that into account. Now, if we're not keeping the house, of course, the trustee, the executor, they could sell the house. The net proceeds could be repatriated back into the estate plan and then pushed into the pet trust or dispersed to the caretaker.
One question that was asked, Alie and Harley, someone is asking if they live in another state, can they still work with either one of you, or do they need a state-based attorney or team to set up the plans for their birds?
I am licensed pretty much in every state, so I can work with anyone. And I am taking on new clients. I did see that. So if anyone would love a consultation, would love to talk to them.
Thank you.
Yeah, for legal, it really depends on the state. So my general recommendation is use a local attorney to get your estate plan done. But with that said, again, if you're out here skiing or just in the summer hiking the mountains and you want to do an estate plan, we can do it, because most of the state's rules are I just can't go into your state if I'm not licensed there, but I am licensed in Colorado and Florida. We are taking on new clients. In terms of cost and planning, I would tell you, nice thing about our firm is we don't charge for initial meetings. They are free, and it's not a 30-minute or a 1 hour. It's typically a 2 hour meeting just to talk about all the estate planning needs. I'm always happy to do multiple meetings. So if, in terms of the whole thing, you want to talk to me first before you talk to Alie, perfectly fine. But yeah, talk with your attorneys, make sure that the price seems appropriate, doesn't seem too outrageous. Again, bigger jurisdictions like California, New York, Illinois, we tend to see the cost of estate planning skew a lot higher. And that's where a lot more people tend to move towards just a simple will because of that cost. Versus other states like Colorado, Texas, the costs tend not to be quite as much because we don't have this, inflated ego in terms of our prices.
And then we had a question that was specific to when you're looking for somebody to help you set up your trust. And they said, when looking for an attorney to handle setting up your trust, are there any qualifications or certifications that you would want that person to have?
At the bare minimum, I would want them to be an estate planning attorney. Don't stay up not late at night watching those midnight car accident jingles, because that's car accidents. while they might be able to do it, I probably don't think they would do the best job. They might not know all the ins and outs. And if they could do it, sometimes they charge an arm and a leg because they have to research the law, get acquainted with everything, and then they tack that cost back onto your bill. So if you do use an attorney who just does estate plans, then you know you're not getting that extra surcharge on there. You know that they do this constantly, and that should help keep your costs down and ensure that the plan is actually going to be viable and valid.
Harley, I just want to add, and you've mentioned it when you've done presentations for our clients, is that you want to make sure you get an attorney that's with a firm. I think that's important because I can't tell you how many times I've had clients come in and says, I can't find my attorney, or he retired, or, and I don't know where my estate document is. If you go with a firm, then there's going to be backup, even for the attorney. We need to kind of figure on the backup. So I would think that would be important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of falls with that same thread that I've seen in the questions here. It's that business continuity. So sometimes clients will go to an estate planning attorney, but they're embedded within a law firm of car accident attorneys. Well, if the estate plan attorney dies, becomes incompetent, or leaves, often we find that these other attorneys cannot pick it up, will not pick it up. So it's really nice if you have that continuity of an estate plan and law firm. So if something happens, someone else can pick it up. They can enforce it. If the will or the trust is lost, the other attorneys know exactly what to do. They have a mechanism to be able to come back and say, hey, here is that document, and I'm willing to sign and go to court and be in your corner to fight for you to make sure that this is what happens.
I think we had mentioned earlier, but we did have a lot of people that were asking specifically if you two were taking on new clients. Is the best way for people to contact you just through your website, through like a contact form? Should they reach out to like Jessica to set up a meeting, or is there a best way for people to contact you two specifically?
Yeah, if they contact our office, at our main line, 303-832-1900, and just ask to set up a meeting with Harley. There's two Harleys here. Either of us are great. One's my father and one's myself. Always happy to help you. We're always happy to take on new clients. If you have existing estate plans, we're happy to review that. There's no cost to review that plan. If you want to tack in a pet trust into an existing estate plan, if it's a revocable trust, it is by far easier. If it's just a last will and testament, sometimes that's a redo because it's going to not have enough structure to put a trust in.
And it certainly has become a much more common thing for individuals to go to different firms to request pet care trusts. We're seeing that across the board. There's a lot of news and out there on the planned giving or programs that we've worked with that people aren't necessarily leaving their estates to their children. Some may not have children. Some want to make sure they leave their donations to a pet via a pet care trust. So that is certainly a growing field. I know we've received requests through estate plans that bird owners have created through your firm, which is always wonderful. And I would think that if someone is looking for an attorney and they talk about setting up a pet care trust, and for example, they get an answer, well, we don't even know what that is, that just frees you up to go on to a different attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when you create the pet trust, and there's a kind of question in here, you can have one giant trust for all your entire flock, or you might treat them like your kids and say, this one has a little bit more needs, so I'm going to create a separate trust for My favorite name here is Skittles because I love Skittles. Skittles, but Skittles has a lot of needs, so I'm going to put a little extra over here. But then I got Lulu over here. She's still young. She doesn't need as much. So if I give this money to the trustee to invest with Alie, by the time Lulu gets old, this money will have grown. It will double, so I don't have to seed it with quite as much. So you can fractionalize into different trusts for each pet. And then you can have, oh, well, the one for Skittles, when Skittles dies, if there's anything left over here, that gets respread across my other birds trust. You can do all sorts of things. It's almost limited just by your imagination. So, whatever you guys want to happen, the estate plan for the most part can occur that way.
And we had several questions about people that already have their revocable trust set up, and we're asking if they were able to add their birds into that, if they needed separate trusts for them. Their current trust only covered their larger assets. Can their pet plans and other things be included into that? And like you said, there's lots of different ways. It sounds like you can do that by having them separated, fractured, kind of different ones. Is there a best way to do that? Is it best to have separate trusts for if you have like separate birds or separate assets, or does it really matter if they're all in one or separated out in any sort of way?
So, yeah. So as I mentioned, if you have an estate plan, a will, or a trust, it may very well be possible to tack in a pet trust. But do you need to go out and create separate trusts, like a revocable trust one, revocable trust two, revocable trust three for all your different birds? No, you don't have to. You could have one parent company, if you will, that you direct all your assets into. And then after you pass away, that parent company gets divided into these new little sub trusts, one for each of your different birds, where you can pool it all together as a giant pot that pays out for all your various birds. But again, just like kids, they're going to have varying different needs. One might have more financial needs than the other. And sometimes we'd hate to see, well, we want to use it this way, but we'd hate to see it where one bird uses way too much money and then it messes up the funding for the other bird. So some people will fractionalize the trust and say, hey, here is that $300,000 seed money for bird A. Here's 200 for bird B, or maybe it's an equal division amongst all of the birds, but they each have their own pot of money. They might all be invested properly, but the caretaker, the bird's needs will vary because we just don't know what maybe some of these underlying health issues are. And again, it's hard to predict. So the more we can jump on the ball sooner, the more we can fund it, more we can grow that money. And maybe more importantly, maybe we can keep Murphy's Law at bay so nothing bad happens. We don't really have to worry about it.
Wonderful. Let's see. I think one of the common questions I'm seeing as well is where people should start. We have some questions about like, should I have my emergency plan first ready to go in case something happens? Should I be first reaching out to different foundations and organizations to even see if they would accept my birds and then start working on my trust? Should I have the trust in place and then contact the organizations? I think because this is such a multifaceted thing, people just don't know where to start. Would you have any recommendations of like, and I know we had talked about easiest is having no plan, kind of a bit of an improvement is having your will and testament. More of an improvement would be having a trust. Would you recommend like starting with a will and testament and then doing a trust? Or are there any first steps that you would recommend for people that are thinking about getting this set up for their birds?
Yeah, from a planning standpoint, I would, and it's kind of like being back in college where you have tons of homework and tons of things you have to do. It's just prioritizing, and maybe sometimes chipping away at the easy items is the best way to do it. So I would create a contingency plan just in case something happens to you. who's in your emergency contact? How would the paramedics get access to the phone? Is there a piece of paper with emergency contacts in your wallet wedged between your driver's license and proof of health insurance? That way, someone gets contacted, and whoever gets contacted, they already have some marching orders to know, oh, I need to go secure the parrots. This person might know where your key is or the garage code. Again, it's a high trust person. That way, we're covering the short term what if emergency. From there, then it could be run off to the financial advisor, run numbers, talk to the different foundations like the TGF to see if they are the right fit, that they could take your birds, what all needs to be done. Then go talk to the attorney. Any of those processes, anywhere, I think, is a great answer. In which step you take kind of depends. You might already have a financial advisor, so that's an easy go-to person right off the bat while you search around, and maybe the financial advisor has some good trusted attorneys that do estate planning that they work closely with already. And then now you're not just going through the phone book calling random numbers. You already have someone that your advisor says, hey, I know these guys. They're good. They do good work. Or you talk to the Gabriel Foundation and say, hey, we have these trusted attorneys that have done pet trusts in the past. Which avenue there you go first really just depends on the situation and what you feel comfortable with. And then your last part is, do we start with a will, then move into a trust? I would say no. I would say talk to a qualified estate plan attorney and pick the best option off the bat. Because if you create a last will and testament and you later on want to add a trust provision, like I mentioned, it might not have enough structure. You might be scrapping that and then creating a new testamentary trust. Or if you decide to move from a will to a revocable trust, I can guarantee you your will get scrapped and you will now create a standalone revocable trust. So I don't want you to pay too much. And with, as Alie said, I like to have a lot of backup contingencies in my plans, because as much fun as it might be, and I say this very sarcastically, to talk to your estate plan attorney about your passing and what happens, it's never high on anyone's list. So I'd like to get it done once, try to future proof it so you don't have to think about it quite that often. And then, as Julie had mentioned, maybe every 5 years or so, revisit it. You're definitely going to talk to your financial advisor more often. And Alie might say, hey, it's been a while. There's some tax law changes. Hey, your assets are this way. Maybe you should talk to Harley or estate plan attorney. And then somewhere in there, you will get a good mix of how often to go back. And in our law firm's policy, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So we'll do that review meeting. If everything looks good, we'll say, great, there's nothing to do. But if there are issues, we'll raise them. We'll talk it over, see if they're applicable. And if they are, then we can always make a change then.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate, the more information or legwork that you can do before going to Harley makes the most sense. You want to make sure that you only want to do it once. So make sure you get the caregiver and who in the backup, the 8 backup people that you want to have in place, or the emergency contacts, the schedules, the sleep routine, anything about your bird that's important. Make sure that's the easy part, because you can do it yourself. And then I would look at the different organizations. If you want to check out the Gabriel Foundation or any other parrot sanctuary, so do your legwork as far as what you want to be in your trust first before going to Harley. So I think Harley should be the last on the list.
We have a couple of things that we advise people to do, and I think anyone can do this. It just takes your time, but take videos of your birds. Take videos of their cages, how they're set up. Keep them. You got that. That's really great information. We also have a form that we provide to people who want to relinquish their birds to us. We call that a client bird history, and it basically is a biopsychosocial overview of your bird's life. If any one of you would like a copy of that form, we'll be happy to email it to you. You can print it out. You can It's an electronic form. You can complete it, print it out, and you'll have it for yourself. And it's going to ask you a lot of information. And the more detail you put into that, the better it is. You can use that anywhere. Anybody reading that, if they can read and they know what a bird needs, they'll be able to put two and two together and get that figured out. So put something in writing, you'll feel good. You'll have that in your binder along with your contingency plan. And I tell people, even though they don't want to place their birds with us yet, maybe we've had those plans in place for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. We've got that. We've got that history. So as we're going through and as we're reading, we go, oh, this is really, really great. You know, we can keep tabs on it. And we, or an organization that you decide to consider, have you and your information in our data. So we know we've got that. Oh yeah, Cindy, I met you, Cindy, in Lake Wales, Florida, when we both took a workshop with the trainer or the Steve Martin, blah, blah, blah. And we go back those number of years. So glad to know about your birds, the whole thing, and have that. And that's wonderful, not just for me right now as the CEO of this, but for our team that one day will be responsible for running this organization. Between our board and between our team, yes, we do have succession plans put into place. As much as I would like to be here for the next 20 or 30 years, that probably isn't going to happen yet. But it is my job and important to me to make sure that as an entity that this organization that I started so many years ago continues as the Gabriel Foundation, and that you've got a team of people who know and understand and are willing to communicate and talk with you and discuss some of these harder things with you about your birds to give you that peace of mind and to give you information. Really, we don't care, and I don't mean that in a cruel, nonchalant way. Where your bird goes is up to you. But for goodness sake, put something into place right now so that you get and you are the controller of what you want to happen to your animal. Because when the opposite happens, it is heartbreaking for people that have been close to you or know that. And after doing this for 31 years, I can tell you we have seen all sides of that equation.
And Julie, do you have any recommendations for those that don't have anyone to list as like the immediate caregiver if they were to pass or become incapacitated? I've noted a number of people on here that don't have any close friends, close family, neighbors, or anything like that that would be able to provide immediate care. Would you recommend just having organizations like TGF or maybe more local organizations listed as, I don't know if you'd be listed as the designation of beneficiary in those situations. But do you have any recommendations for people that don't have individuals that they would be able to coordinate that with?
I can speak for ourselves. If you've developed a relationship, even if it's just in electronic communication, and we have a history of communication with you, you can reach out to us. You can have your mother, father, or sister, whoever is there, reach out to us. You can have your veterinarian reach out to us. You can set up a monthly sponsorship for a bird or a monthly communication where maybe we don't hear from you for a month or two and we're wondering what's going on and we reach out. Those are options. And I think that 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 someone is better than no one. And if we end up being that entity that you choose, we can help you. We know other upstanding organizations throughout this United States that can be there too in the event, even if it's just a cursory intervention till that bird gets here. A lot of us are working together. We know that this is really crucial on building bridges and creating that, because all of us are here for one thing, and that's because we love parents and we want to provide for them. But we also really care about each of you, because we want you to be prepared and we want you to be able to make that choice while you still can. Because when you can't, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record with this, when you can't, that is when there is tragedy involved. And we have seen it too many times. And that is one of the reasons I am so grateful to Harley and to Alie for doing this. We all need a little nudge, and this is one that breaks it down. It's understandable. It's warm, it's intimate, even though there are a whole lot of us on this. And I feel that people can derive comfort that they know that there's something that they can do right now to put into place. And I'm very grateful to both of you for sharing your expertise with us about that.
Yes, well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I'm more than willing to share the slides that I have. I know you had mentioned if you can, how to get in contact with me. What I can do is put my contact information in the slide deck. If you want that, please reach out to Julie. I'll send it to her or the Gabriel Foundation, and you can request it from them. Or if you want to, Julie, just send it out to the participants that have.
Absolutely, absolutely. You bet. And one other thing I wanted to add to, Alie, is that you have handled the Gabriel Foundation's brokerage account for how many years is it now? A long time. So maybe explain to people that if they have different investment instruments, how that can work. If you could maybe just take one minute and add that.
Yeah, so just like I had mentioned before, the donor advised fund where you can gift appreciated assets, you can also gift to an individual charity appreciated assets or cash. Typically cash, it goes directly to the organization like the Gabriel Foundation. But if you have stock, that can't be given to the Gabriel Foundation. It has to go through a financial firm. And we have an account set up for the Gabriel Foundation for stock requests. And we've had that in the past where clients, all they need to do is call me. We can arrange what firm is coming from. They initiate it from the firm that they're transferring it to. We can give them the information of the account here to transfer to. It's a pretty simple exercise, but again, I find people really enjoy that. This is stock that, like I said, has appreciated. They're not, they've maybe paid $1,000 for it and now it's worth 100,000. If you bought into Apple way back in the day or Microsoft, and they would love to use that for charitable means. So absolutely, if you have stock that you want to donate and don't have the cash, or would rather keep the cash and donate your appreciated securities, we have a way to do that.
Thank you, Alie.
Alrighty. Well, I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email to all of our attendees and everyone that had signed up. I will include that slide deck. Let's see. We can also include the client bird history form if we would like to provide that people or for everyone to fill out. And we can discuss some other handouts and resources that we can provide for everybody. We didn't get to all of the questions that we had today. So if your question didn't get answered, you can go ahead and send that to education@thegabrielfoundation.org, and we can pass along some of those outstanding questions. Again, if you would like to contact Alie or Harley, if you're working on your estate planning, we can provide their contact information and the best way to get a hold of them as well. And then if you had any specific questions for Julie or TGF regarding like succession planning, things like that, you can go ahead and reach out to us directly and we'll be in touch there. But Julie, did you have any final thoughts, any closing comments here before we finish up?
Well, I think this has been so informative. It's been very emotional in many ways for me because I look at my history and my life with birds and what it would mean to me if my birds didn't get taken care of. And I think about that every day with the Gabriel Foundation as well. So I understand what every single person on this webinar is feeling. I'm there. I'm there double duty, as a matter of fact. So I think that as we grow and we learn more, and I think that with the expertise that Harley and Alie have to bring to us, I can see with their participation, some follow-up webinars about this down the road. And that everyone's got a great opportunity to start and track what your journey is like when you're making that journey, so that when you think, like, what did I have to go through to figure this out? What worked, what didn't? That's great information for all of us to share. And I want to thank everyone for participating in this, and especially to Harley and to Alie. Their acumen and expertise is beyond reproach, and I think that that's one of the things that we have stood for in our 31-year history, and that's transparency and integrity. And this is about you and your birds and how we can help you provide for them. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank
It's
you.
my pleasure.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much. It was wonderful to meet you both virtually, and we just so appreciate having you on. Everyone was so delighted in the comments here to have your expertise, and so we'll definitely try to schedule a follow-up and maybe go into some more depth on some of these topics. But I think that that's all we have for now, everybody. Thank you, everyone that attended. We so appreciate it. And I will be sending out a follow-up email, hopefully today, but if not, next week.
And then, just as a reminder, Kara, let them know about where they can watch the recorded version, please.
So our webinars are recorded. I do edit them a little bit. I add captioning just so they're a little bit more accessible. That does take me a little bit of time to do. So I will likely have this webinar posted next week, and that is viewable on our YouTube channel. It's just the Gabriel Foundation, or it might be just Gabriel Foundation on YouTube. And then they will also be posted on our website under the education tab under webinars as well. So I always send out an email once our webinars have been posted on our YouTube channel, so you can keep an eye out for that. I update on our social media pages, so our Facebook and our Instagram, so you can also keep an eye there. But I will be sure to make sure that everyone knows it is posted when I have it captioned and edited. Alrighty, well, I think that's all we had. Thank you again so much. It was
Bye,
wonderful
everybody.
meeting you.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.